There are more water molecules in our body than all the stars in the perceivable universe. The study of water is the study of self. I've been a crystallographer for so long, and after seeing water respond rather than react to conscious expression, that's when I really started to see water in a completely different way. We can see the voice of water in picture form, and it can get much more complex than that. I've seen water override what I'm thinking to show me what I'm feeling. Water shows me reflections of myself that are so beautiful, and yet sometimes I find that hard to see. Water is not to be taken for granted. Water is the house of God. To see water as a representation of something divine, and then we could start seeing ourselves as something divine.
Veda Austin, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
What was the shift for you from seeing water as a substance to a living intelligence? When was that shift for you?
Well, I've been a crystallographer for so long, 14 years, and after seeing water respond rather than react to conscious expression, that's when I really started to see water in a completely different way. I mean, I was in a horrendous car accident and I had a healing experience with water. But until I was working in the realms where the unseen becomes seen, where thoughts literally are being crystallized in ice, I don't know that I fully comprehended that water was an intelligent designer. And I would say that some examples might be helpful. When I was curious, is my consciousness impacting the water or is water conscious? And so I started working with words that are conceptual words, words that I don't have a picture for. And one of those words was ego. So we don't buy ego at the store, and we don't know what ego exactly looks like. So with the word ego, I wrote it down on a piece of paper, put my petri dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds, removed and froze using my short-term freezing method. And what water designed, I could never have even thought of myself. It had big shoulders, this little neck, a little face, and a giant balloon head. And it was such an incredible representation of an outward expression of ego. And I couldn't only think, gosh, I never thought this. I never projected that thought. This is water designing something from its own, from a unique place. I also used the word grief, thinking, oh, maybe I see a broken heart or tears, but water designed the outline of a person with holes inside. I spoke the word Yeshua and got this amazing, kind of urn shape with all these beautiful, intricate patterns. But as I looked closer, there was something that looked like writing, and it didn't look like English. And I ended up zooming in on that, taking a photo, and I put it out on social media saying, does this look like anything to anyone? I had over 1,000 people reach out to me saying that's like handwritten Hebrew for Yeshua. None of these things I could have expected. And I think when I started to see water as a designer, so it doesn't design exact replicas of the influence. For example, maybe I put my hand in the water and I might see an image of a hand, but for the very first work I ever did with water, that's kind of what I did, and water designed what looked like an X-ray of my hand. So how is it doing this? It's not a exact photocopy. It's like an artistic expression that is recognizable. So that led me into the query of water as an intelligent designer and not just a drink or not just something we bathe in, but actually I think it could well be the house of the divine.
So like anything in life, you can look at something through multiple perspectives. We could look at water through the philosophical, the mystical, the energetic, the biological, the environmental, so many different components in which we could look at water. And perhaps because it is that analogy, like a fish doesn't know what water is because it's so ubiquitous within its environment. Like we've always known water, it's been a part of our life. So we just, we almost take it for granted. We forget to drink it. We don't recognize the power of bathing in it. And we don't understand the intelligence of it. And so before we dive deeper into your experiments and the work that you've been doing and the possibility of water being more than just a mere substance or liquid, as we know, H2O, from a molecular standpoint, why do you feel like it's important to have these conversations about what water is right now? Like, why is now an important time to be talking about all this?
I think any time is an important time to be talking about this, but especially now, I mean, water has revealed itself so that it can be seen and heard and understood. Certainly in this visual way, with my work and with other people's work, where we can see the voice of water in picture form. It's important because water essentially is teaching us about transparency, about a universal truth. Water is teaching us that not only just by molecular count, but it's helpful to say this, by molecular count, not by volume, we're 99% water. There are more water molecules in our body than all the stars in the perceivable universe. The study of water is the study of self. The study of water is the study of spirit. And the study of water is the study of the divine. So when is this not a good topic to talk about or focus on? And I think in ancient times, and certainly I know in indigenous cultures, water is still revered, is still considered holy. In ancient times, water wasn't even called water. It was called the waters because it was considered to be a sacred body of water. When Romans brought plumbing into creation, people started to suddenly see the waters taking away their waste. So the waters was reduced to the word water. And now we reduce it even further to H2O. But in the English language, where the waters or waters outside of biblically is used, is when we say her waters broke. There is this memory of water being sacred and something that houses the divine.
There is something really unique in the perspective of us entering Earth, being through amniotic fluid and in water and, gestating in that period for a while. So there's a lot of really philosophical understandings that I'm excited to dive into. I love how you said the study of water is the study of self, and it's very on brand for this podcast and what I'm very much so passionate about. But when you started crystallography and taking photos of water in a certain state, right? Would you say it's not quite ice, but it's not liquid yet? How do you describe what is the stage in which you're taking photos of water that are infused with different intentions and stuff?
It's more of a plasma stage. So the stage between liquid and ice, water is more like a plasma. Sometimes it's called the fourth phase of water. There's a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. And that type of water is actually H3O2. It has an extra hydrogen and oxygen atom and is more viscous. So a good example of a fourth phase water is aloe vera or egg white, things that stretch. And it has an ordered molecular structure. It absorbs more light and it has negative charge. So all of those things are qualities of fourth phase water. And I discovered this freezing method through my own curiosity and learning about the fourth state of water and reading Dr. Gerald Pollack, The Fourth Phase of Water, and his book and his writings. And so he said that in the stage between liquid and solid, in the freezing stage and also in the melting stage, this fourth phase water is there. So I was curious, like, when are these structures starting to form, and is it actually in this fourth phase stage? So I started to open my freezer earlier and earlier to see what was going on in there, because I use a regular freezer. I'm not using a microscope. I take all my photos on my iPhone. And at about 5 minutes and 20 seconds in my freezer, I saw there was liquid on top and ice underneath. So I took it out, naturally tipped the liquid away, and photographed the ice that was stuck to the dish. And what's interesting about this ice is that it's not exactly ice. It's not exactly a solid. It's more of a plasma. And a wonderful example that a friend of mine who also is a crystallographer who learnt my method, Christina, she had done some crystallography using a glass baking dish. So you saw all the beautiful wave patterns there. And she's holding it up. And so what normally happens is that the water will just melt or evaporate. But with her particular dish, the sheet of ice moved down the dish and then scrolled upon itself with all of the information still embedded on the ice. And when we showed that to Dr. Jerry Pollack, he said that the most likely answer was that it was sheets and sheets and sheets of fourth phase water. So we know that it is more of a viscose type of plasmatic ice, which allows more light not only to be absorbed, but more light also to be released. And when I've opened the freezer at the perfect time, I filmed and photographed the ice chute. And coming out of the ice chute, there is a light that looks a lot like a halo. And I think it is light that paves the way for the design of the imagery. And given that water is only one part matter, the 2 hydrogens and oxygen, and that the rest is photonic light, that literally makes water a lighthouse. So that's the shortest way I can describe that. The stage of water that I'm working with is not an ice, it's not a solid, because water freezes in 3 main stages. I think of those stages like spirit, blood, and body. The spirit stage is the stage where I take the ice out and do my crystallography. It's interesting because that ice, essentially, if we want to call it that, or plasma, has pushed all of the solates out. So everything that's in the water that you would see in an analysis, for example, has been pushed out. So it's an extremely pure state of water. And then the second stage of freezing is where there's like a water sandwiched between 2 layers of ice. So water has built scaffolding, and the liquid water, when that is frozen, and then you have a solid. So we know you're over-frozen when there's water trapped between 2 layers of ice, or if it's a solid and there's lots and lots of bubbles or darkness in the ice. And the dark bubbles, they come from the color of all the solates. So the clarity of the ice that I'm working with is so clear because it's not holding the things that are in the water, what water holds. Once you finally get to a solid, if anyone's seen an ice cube, it's quite cloudy. It's cloudy because of what's in the water. If you freeze a distilled water, you'll see a clear cube. So, but I like to work with water with salts and minerals. I think of distilled water more like the observer only, whereas I think of spring water like an active participant with the ability to observe. And our bodies, much like the ocean, we have salt, water, and minerals within us. And I think it's the salts and minerals that also help to store and ground the memories that we have.
So the idea that thoughts and intentions can literally affect the molecular structure of water from a secular point of view is pretty out there. It's not really widely accepted. I think a decent amount of people, especially in certain spaces, are familiar with Masaru Emoto's work. And as his work wasn't as, embraced by the scientific community for its kind of repeatability and the scientific approach of being able to kind of, show this, I'm just curious because in your process, you're infusing intention or through music, through seeds, through words, through photos, different imagery, and you're seeing how water is responding to it, right? And so before we kind of address the first thing that I mentioned, what are a couple of your favorite examples of this that you've done? I remember seeing the sunflower one, which was really beautiful. What are a few that stick out off the top of your mind?
Yeah, I love that one because in each seed there's about 10% of water still in it, and water is always in conversation with itself. So when I put the sunflower seed into the dish of water and then removed it, water didn't design the seed. It designed the outcome of the seed. It read the information of the seed and designed the sunflower. Same thing with a flax seed. I see the flax pod, which is kind of like the fruit of the flax where the seeds are. And same thing with an apple seed. I see the apple. But I also see with the apple, for example, that I've let that water melt, then refrozen it 3 days later and seen the apple is still there. And then let that melt and refroze it 7 days later and the apple is still there. So I love that. I mean, I have over 64,000 photos of water responding in an intelligent way. It's so hard to choose.
That's incredible. There's so many, and just flipping through some of the imagery in your book was it's really cool to see. It's so artistic and feel so creative, which I know is obviously like you see yourself also as a co-creator and lover of art in this whole process too. And I think that in pursuit of I guess total materialistic validity, we kind of lose the metaphorical, poetic, and beauty of a lot of these things too. So. But how do you address head-on the criticism of pareidolia and the lack of potential repeatability with these things? Like ideally, we should be able to put a sunflower seed there every time and see this same result, right? So what do you say?
If water was a machine, maybe. That's not what we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
We're working with something quite different. I do get a lot of more scientific attention for hydroglyphs because of the vast amount of repeatability I have.
And what are those?
So essentially what I have is 3 ways that water shares information. A signature pattern that allows us to see the type of water it is, and that's also very much seated in repeatability. So I see a repeated pattern there for rainwater, for example, which is like a fanning pattern. It always is the same kind of pattern. Spring water that's frozen within half an hour of collection from a spring forms what I call a star fern hexagon. It's like a 6-pointed star with ferns off each leg that would form a hexagonal pattern. Municipal tap water has a lot of disorder. Filtered water has a lot of compacted lines that are kind of stuck together. So you can identify the type of water you're working with based off repeated patterns. So that's a very scientific kind of way of viewing that because repeatability is there. The repeatability is there. Then we
and the
have
structural differences of those different types of water, filtered, well, spring, tap.
Yeah.
They all correlate to have repeatable different structures.
That's right. And I have an ability over all of these years of doing this of neutrality. So I simply don't have a desired outcome quite often. That's come over time. It's really easy to get your head involved because you want to see something.
Right.
And water is wild. So we can address a number of things about that. The fact that water is in what many mainstream scientists would say molecular chaos. It means its hydrogen bonds are breaking and it's reattaching. It's in what you could see as chaos, like changing or updating its information every trillionth of a second. So like, well, water couldn't possibly have memory based off the fact that it's in constant chaos. So if you were to ask a quantum physicist the same question, and they could say, well, yeah, there's molecular chaos, but there's a difference between chaos and excitement. What we're seeing here in water is more of a molecular excitement, where water gets excited about something. There is a connection between the observer and the observed. There is a connection between the conscious expression and the receiver, that is water. that can be, I think, explained better through light. I've already mentioned that I've seen light coming out of the tip of the ice just as it's beginning to take form, and it takes form of that information. And human beings, essentially, emit light. We have conscious expression and we emit light. That's not woo-woo. And I got some really wonderful information from an Indigenous lady. Now, this might seem like, where's she going with this? Because we're talking about science. But I spoke about this at the annual water conference in Portugal last year to a bunch of physicists and biologists and water scientists. And many of them had like this aha moment. And I said, well, this lady said she could speak to bees. And she said she'd watch their hives for long periods of time until one day a bee somehow communicated to her and said, look, I always give them some kind of personality. We don't mind you looking at the hive. Could you please just not look at it for so long? Because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we prefer it to be darker. When you're working with water, you can't ignore the fact you're also working with light and frequency. And each person has their own frequency. Water is a receiver, and when it's given the right environment, it can share that received information in picture form. But we're seeing like snapshots of information, and it can get much more complex than that. But I kind of want to address something as well, is that people talk about pareidolia, and it's, it looks like a crack and da-da-da-da in the wall, and that looks like Mother Mary or something like that. Well, to address that, Dr. Jerry Pollack, in my earlier part of doing this work, he said, why don't you put 25 of your photographs together, make a survey, circulate it, through social media or something, and simply say, what does this image look like to you? Not leading anybody on in any way. And so that's exactly what I did. And I gave it to other people. So people didn't know that it was me. They didn't know what they were looking at. And 298 people did the survey. And 85% of those people were able to recognize the ice imagery for what the influence was prior to freezing. And there were 3 images where 100% of people were able to recognize the image. So that's a kind of a big deal. So the images are recognizable. And then you talk about repeatability as being like the gold standard for science. Well, a nice example, even with the art, and then we'll get to hydroglyphs, which is where all the repeatability is. But even within the art, people often ask me, but can it repeat that? Well, actually, it can do something quite complex. In my talks, I often show this picture. So I have my friend Wendy, who was the first face I ever saw in water, and I used her photograph as an image because I was, in the early days, wondering, is this just some random thing? Or what if it starts to show me different people's features and maybe it's not random? And so I put the dish of water on top of her photo, and sure enough, I see her face. So then I took the face of the ice face, and I printed that out and used that as the influence, and water designed a negative of her face. Side by side, you can literally put them one over the top of each other. There's repeatability even in imagery. So when it comes to hydroglyphs, essentially what I'm using is words as my Rosetta Stone. I noticed that if I put something in the freezer and it was on top of this is an example of like a pizza box, and it had pizza on it, would design a pizza. I said, oh, that's really unusual. That's interesting. And then I noticed that words seemed to affect the way water behaved. I had a petri dish of water on top of a wedding invitation, and the main word was marriage. And it showed this amazing ring. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But hydroglyphs evolved from music. So my son had read Emoto's book, Messages in Water, and he had looked at all the pictures. And he came to me and he said, "Oh, Mum, I think water hates me." And I'm like, "Why, honey?" And he said, "But look, water only likes classical music and John Lennon and it hates heavy metal." And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know you liked heavy metal." He said, "I don't." But he said, "It also suggests that water doesn't like swearing, and I like Tupac, and Tupac swears, therefore water must hate me." And he said, "Even I swear sometimes when you don't know about it." I'm like, "My baby, water is not in judgment." Let me make that clear. Water is not in judgment. I said, "Let's see what water will do." I said, "I'm pretty sure whoever did the heavy metal probably just didn't like it." So we did this whole exploration over a very long period of time with different genres of music, simply playing a song, leaving the room, coming back and freezing. And we started with Tupac, a song called All Eyes on Me. And we got this big eye in the ice. And he was like, "Okay, I think water's okay. I think I'm good with water now." And then that led on to like the House of the Rising Sun with two pillars and a sun coming up. The bane of almost every parent's life, Baby Shark. There was like this shark with a big open mouth. It went on and on and on and on and on. And that's why in my book, it's got a huge music section. There's rock, there's heavy metal, there's classical music, there's R&B, there's, electronic music, there's chanting, a bit of everything, reggae. And over again, I saw water kept like picking up from words of songs. And when I did Stairway to Heaven, I kept seeing the stairway image. And I repeated that over and over again. And each time, not 1 in 10 or not 1 in 100, I would see this kind of ladder image. And after seeing it multiple times, I started to think, no, I wonder if that actually is like a symbol for this word. And so I simply wrote the word stairway down and then did my whole process by putting the dish on top of it for 30 seconds, removing and freezing. And the reason I say 30 seconds is that it's not too long and not too short. It's not true that if you leave it there for like 4 days, it's going to imprint it stronger. Water is far more receptive when your conscious expression is part of the equation. As soon as you remove your conscious expression, it kind of goes back to whatever it was doing. That piece is quite important. It's like a relationship. When you meet somebody for the first time and you're already really interested to get to know about them, you might be in a cafe, but your focus is on one another. So it doesn't matter if there's noise in the background and the waiter or waitress comes and serves you. Your attention is there, it's being held. And that's the same within this relationship aspect of water. Coming into right relationship with water is a very important piece. So I started working with words, and so when I kept seeing the same symbol repeat by using the written word stairway, I realized that there is a symbol here, because to say I have one, I need to have seen the same symbol repeat using the same word, not only in English, in multiple languages, at least 50 times. And so in my talks, I generally give 64 examples of each repeated hydroglyph. And since then, I now have somewhere in the region of 45 hydroglyphs that have multiple layers of meaning. So there are several words attached to one symbol, and they interrelate. So this is kind of a big deal. To put it mildly, it allows us to have a kind of universal language, a way in which we could potentially even decipher languages that are undeciphered so far.
I'm so fascinated at just in the topic of cymatics and seeing how sound and the reverberation of energy affects the physical, molecular, structural components of water and sand, and just how the vibration carries information and correlates to certain geometric patterns. Because in many ways, geometry is like the silent language of nature. And we see that it is carrying information and what geometry is showing. And for example, you look at a snowflake, or you look at the structural component of water, or how it's different and it comes from these different sources, like in your hydroglyphs. there is a direct correlation between order, proportionality, symmetry, and beauty and geometry. And it's fascinating to me because often we think when we see something beautiful, it looks pretty, but it's actually signifying deeper order behind what we're seeing. And when we look at like what is the health of the water I'm drinking, for example, you know, water that is structured and both its appearance of how it looks, but in its actual geometric form is going to have a better impact on our physiology when we drink it. And I just find it really fascinating, that link between beauty and geometry and the vitality of the water. Because I mean, it's magic. You know, you look at like a snowflake and you see this incredible, unique design every time that's formed. And there's no word or system of thought that can explain what that is. You know, it's beyond, and it's really incredible. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are on geometry as sort of the silent language of nature and how it's portraying different information across different structures for water.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the signature pattern of spring water, for example, is this beautiful geometric hexagon. And so its geometries are perfect. In fact, I'm looking at the energetic state of health when I am looking at the crystallographic patterns of water. And so
in your study, you've like, for example, this is spring water, and like in a cup like this, that of course the vessel water is held in affects the structure as well. You'll see a very different structure of the water versus filtered water that comes out of the tap.
You do see different patterns. But I would also say that, especially spring water that's been moving through the earth, it's very sensitive to light. And those patterns do change when it's been exposed to light, particularly
UV?
No, particularly artificial light. So just like humans are impacted by artificial light, so is water. But even just sunlight, its structures do change. So when it's been going through the infrared light, through the earth, and through that kind of filtration system, when it comes out of the earth, what I've seen is that its structures can change within 72 hours when exposed to light. And it's always interesting to me when you go to like Whole Foods or somewhere, so many beautiful spring waters, they're held in plastic see-through bottles. So I love to collect my own spring water and collect it in blue glass bottles or Myron glass bottles, because Myron glass kind of creates a force field around the water, very, very helpful for people that want to drink water whilst they're doing a therapy session with someone, for example. So a practitioner who is...
Is that like blue glass? Or what is Myron?
It's actually like a violet glass, but it looks black.
Got it.
And that is a protector of not only structure, but of the outside information. So good for traveling through a lot of EMF, through airports, airplanes, and that kind of thing. And you can make blue solar water with blue glass bottles. It has to be glass. That is be the only time I would recommend putting water into the sunlight for any length of time. Because if you think about it as a spring water, when it has been left in the sunshine in a see-through container for a couple of weeks, maybe even a week on its own, it should start to grow an algae, because spring water has all of the components for life. There's water, there's light, there's minerals, so an algae should grow. And yet, usually when you buy water, spring water, it's often gone through some process, whether that's certain filtration, that may be some kind of sterilization, might be some kind of silver ionizing. There's various aspects to it to stop that from happening.
A quick note on that, by the way, if you're curious about the water I personally drink and recommend, it's natural spring water from Alive Waters. They are the only unprocessed fresh spring water delivery service here available in the States. Some benefits of the water are its perfect mineral balance, silica, and it tastes great. They sell these Italian glass cups, and their glass for their jars are infinitely recyclable, and I feel it helps maintain the structure of the water as well. Currently, they deliver to most of California, New York, Austin area, South Florida, and Portland. But if they don't service your area, they have resources on their website to help you find, wherever you live in the world, find natural springs in your area, both hot and cold. They were kind enough to give you guys half off your first order with them. So if you want to take advantage of that, just go to alivewaters.com and use code KnowThyself for 50% off your first water delivery and everything purchased with it. Link in the description. Stay hydrated, folks, and back to the episode. I'm curious how much of like physiological illness and disease could really be supported by drinking water as it was naturally intended to, which we're so divorced from in the modern world.
We are. I mean, in New Zealand, I'm very fortunate. There are many springs where you can go and collect water from. I mean, it is nice for people to feel safe. There's been a lot of scaremongering going on, with spring water and all this kind of thing, which is interesting since it's gone through such an incredible filtration system. But going to the mouth of the spring it's a wonderful experience. Many people don't even know what spring water behaves like or looks like. They have never been able to go there. They're used to it kind of being pumped through some kind of tap. But it's a whole incredible organ in many ways. Most spring waters that you have access to have already had an analysis done. And you can see there's a living quality within that water. And many people have shifted from drinking municipal tap water over to raw, wild, harvested spring water. Have found a really big change in not only their health, but even in things like your eyesight. Your eye lens is 99% highly ordered, structured water. When I had a healing experience with water, it was from a deep, deep underwater artisan water. And nearly everyone who tried it had their eyesight improve. So there are many, many things which indicate that nature knows best. I find a lot of, and I'm grateful, there's a lot of people turning towards non-GMO, to growing their own food, organic, and all these different kinds of things. And yet they turn to different machines, like different ionizing machines, for example, to get their water rather than going to natural sources. And those ionizing machines are forcing water to go through a process of electricity, an electrical process. And that's not as stable. For example, that unnaturally lifts the pH up to like a pH 10, for example. They might go for that. Or say a pH 9.9 or 9.5, which is very high. And then also has a stream of acid water. So it splits the water into two parts, acid and alkaline. And you can modify the measure of alkalinity. But when exposed to air, that pH starts to drop within half an hour to an hour. Whereas we've done many tests with the spring water, for example, the artisan water that helped heal me, 7 years of time, and it is still in the high 9s.
It's so fascinating because it's right in plain sight. Like when we look at water for its cleansing, purifying capacity, both in drinking and its ability to dissipate elements within our system and cleanse the system internally, but also anybody who's like bathed in a river, or like I was in Kauai about 6 months ago and there's this amazing cold creek that I love going to, and just laying as it like wash over my head through my whole body, literally feel like reborn after. And it's no coincidence that like baptism and like Jesus, and being reborn is literally in water, funny enough. So it's like there's not an aspect of life in which water doesn't touch.
Even in the Bible, water is mentioned 722 times. more than faith, love, and worship. So that's kind of a big deal. It's interesting too to me because the smallest verse in the Bible, the shortest, is simply Jesus wept, which is all about the tears, which is the water coming from the eyes.
Which have a different chemical molecular makeup based off of tears of joy versus tears of sadness.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
I've done some work with tears and different emotional tears, and also with chemical tears, which are the ones where you like cut an onion, you can't help but cry.
Yeah.
And the one where I cut the onion, it looked like the iris of my eye. But interestingly, the one with the different emotions of joy and relief and sorrow, they all showed variations of emanating hexagon.
It's fascinating because Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's been on the podcast a couple times, is doing actually work in his retreats where they're capturing tears. And there's 3 different types of tears that can come from our system, and they'd have different chemical and hormonal makeups. And it's fascinating what those reveal about, obviously, our emotional landscape, as water is the element of the emotion. So fascinating.
Well, our faces are designed in such a perfect way that when we cry in our like sorrow, but also in our joy, there's 2 different things have gone on there. But the same thing is that they come out of our eye ducts, come around our cheeks, but roll back towards our mouths because they've been reordered and restructured to either heal our heart or help heal our heart or to expand our heart further. So we have this beautiful liquid system, this liquid medicine right within us. I always think it's beautiful that water reveals itself in those moments of joy and in sorrow.
What does it mean to you to become water-like?
To become water-like.
Yeah. Become like water.
Yeah. To become transparent. To become non-judgmental. To flow, not force. To forgive.
It's interesting to think of water as a mirror in that aspect because, of course, like when water is still, we can see our reflection in it, but it also, in many ways, reflects our emotional state and is responding to it. And I feel a difference in the yogic tradition and Eastern wisdom traditions. It's said to like actually like hold your water with both hands and like be with it for a second as you drink it slowly. And I know a lot of us, especially in the West, are more flippant and drinking it with one hand and standing up and walking around. But it's best physiologically to be, you know, had sitting down and drink intentionally, just like eating intentionally. We're in intention deficit, very much so across the board. But it is interesting to see the mirror-like aspects of water.
But I've seen water override what I'm thinking to show me what I'm feeling. It's very aligned with how we're feeling. And an example would be if I'm genuinely sad. But doing some crystallography, for example, I have a waiting list of 2 years for people sending me stuff to do crystallography with. So I was working on a project with certain flowers in water, and then taking them out to see if we'll see the flower signature. And during the whole time, that whole day of working with water never showed me one single flower. It just showed me sad faces every day, all day. Whenever I'm sad, it just shows me some reflection of my emotional state.
When you mentioned what it's like to become water-like, and most people are familiar with that Bruce Lee quote, and we look at the qualities of water, of how it adapts, changes, evolves, fits to its environment, flows, is reflective, all these things. What does that look like in a daily practice, like in a really practical aspect of being like water? What does that look like to you?
Well, I have been on this journey with water, and it has been a journey. I have seen reflections of myself I wish that I could see. Water shows me reflections of myself that are so beautiful, and yet sometimes I find that hard to see because I look in the mirror and I don't always see that. And I know that so many people do the same thing. We can be so nice to other people, and yet we can be so horrible to ourselves. And when water shows me something, if I even say, show me to me, show me a reflection of me. And it shows me something like the creation hydroglyph back, which is one of the most beautiful hydroglyphs I have, which is like waves throughout the dish. Or it shows me a star, or it shows me just the incredibly beautiful things. And I'm like, it's not just looking at all of the stuff that I focus on, it's seeing the fluids, the love in me. And what water's shown me and has helped me practically each day is that being in right relationship with all bodies of water. It's not limited to people. That includes the air even. It includes animals and plants and bodies of water outside of ourselves even. And I don't see myself as separate all the time. It's easy to see ourselves as separate because we look in the mirror and we see this body. But the water we drink, it's gone through the trees and the clouds and the dinosaurs and ancestors. And if
Wild to think about.
it is wild to think about, and then we drink it, and it becomes us. Even with food, like there's so much water in fruits, for example, and we take on the energy imprint of that thing we're eating and we're taking in. So we have energy of the apple. We have the energy of the banana becoming us. We literally are connected to everything. And yet we just don't think about it in that way. And it's so easy to take things for granted, take water for granted. Sometimes the power goes off where we live and so we don't have running water. It's like we have spring water that we've collected in these containers, but it quickly reminds you of how much we work with water every day and how much we take it for granted. Water is a mirror, and when I'm working in crystallographically, I see it's speaking to the energy inside of me, and it's reflecting that. It's reflecting like an energy signature of myself. It's reflecting things that I'm thinking about, or even things that are about to happen. Hydromancy has happened many times in my work, and like an example would be putting my thumb into the water, obviously removing it, and it's designed an amazing thumb with the details of the lines on my knuckle and the nail. But in the nail, in the ice, there's been a chip. And I literally chipped my nail 3 hours after doing that crystallography. And so it kind of predicted my nail was going to get chipped. So it's kind of extraordinary. But I've seen that several times. But bringing it back to what water shows me is that water is not to be taken for granted. Water is like the house of God.
Yeah, I mean, without it, none of us exist, right? It's the connective tissue of the planet. And if we're looking for life out in the universe, we look for water. There is no life without water. And I love how you shared the interconnectedness that water is, the binding force between us all and between all life. And it is poetic, existential to think about how the water that is in us now and that we drink tomorrow has been on the planet for a very long time and has gone through glaciers and rainforests and Jesus and, the great sages of time. And it's interesting. And if water does continue and hold memory, then what does that say about the water that we're, spending time in and around and drinking?
Well, some of the water even came from meteorites from outer space. So there is different energy signatures in all of the water bodies where it lands, but then I guess it evaporates again, so water reincarnates for all to see. And earlier on in the podcast, we were talking about, how do we know, how does water receive information? Well, how do you feel me? There's water speaking to water. How can we know that our child is sad or something has happened, and we just have this sense, this feeling like, oh, it feels like there's something wrong. And then if we ring them and we find out that we were right, or if we think of somebody and then they call us, this is all explanations and things that may have experienced in the world where water is speaking to water, and it's not limited to time, space, or distance. So I always kind of smile inside in this thing where it seems so difficult to imagine that water can receive information and share it within a crystallographic medium, because we're feeling beings made of, if you reduce it down or you boil it down, so to speak, we're salts, water, minerals, and consciousness. And water is not just a liquid. It's all these multiple different stages, and there's water in the air. The fact that we breathe out means there's water in the air. And that also helps us have a liquid crystal antenna or a liquid antenna, whereby through our electrical charge, the water in the air is able to be attracted to that electrical charge. And through the both of them, electrical charge and a kind of more like an evaporated water, we're able to receive information and share information, but also feel and sense the information in what we might deem as future through intuition. When we don't listen to our intuition, we always wish we had. It's sort of saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't get in that car, or maybe I should ring that person. And we're receiving information that's just that the water is already received. It's just a bit ahead of our timeline, if you will. And we receive that as a kind of knowing, as a feeling. So that there is ways in which we can really explain a lot of the way we are through the waters.
I would love to bring this in a really practical aspect. In Ayurveda, the first step of disease is accumulation. And water has the great capacity to dissipate, purify, cleanse through water fasts and then just drinking good water throughout our day. And like you said, the humidity in the air, the water that we're bathing in and breathing in hot showers, like in today's day and age, because we have covered a good bit of the structural component. When it comes to a little bit more of the material aspect of what's in water, from the TDS to the mineral count to, unfortunately, a lot of fluoride, chlorine, heavy metals, and whatnot, for people that want to come into right relationship with water, what would you say are like all the categories from a high level overview that one would consider in, having the best water?
I've been working with the autistic non-speaking children from the telepathy tapes and asked them that question, because I get asked that all the time. Like, what can we do for the waters that are polluted? What can we do to make a difference? And they essentially said to ask to be a vessel for source to flow through, so that the waters can receive that information from source. Because through mining and various other things that have happened, they feel like they want to feel that source energy again, that connection, and you can literally be that for them, to simply invite source to open up, to give the waters everything they need. We're so used to everything having to be so practical and so physical, and we have completely forgotten the power within us to affect and improve things. We are bodies of water that are able to communicate with other bodies of water. And although at the moment I don't see chemical change, I see structural change. When, for example, I'm working with municipal tap water, that holds all the varied things that tap water has. But then when you let that melt and refreeze it and hold it to your heart for 1 minute lovingly and refreeze, you see massive structural change, ferns and flowers and whatnot. Well, I think in time we might see, I hope, I haven't seen it yet, but I hope that there can even be physical change, the chemical change. But all water has potential still. And I think sometimes we don't give water enough credit. If water is a sentient being, for example, why would we think it couldn't shift? Why would we think that this world, perhaps it is that water doesn't want to flood, it wants to flood the hearts of people? What if, as a collective, people could simply come together as bodies of water to help shift the open source waters that we have? I see biggest changes in tap water with collective consciousness more than any restructuring device or anything out there. And what encourages me so much is I'm hearing these words of wisdom from people who I believe who genuinely are tapped in, not only as young people from the telepathy who have telepathy, but who can also tap into other realms of consciousness and a divine consciousness. And I trust them. I trust that they are saying there is simple ways we can transform the waters. Even municipal tap water still has potential.
Of course. And, it doesn't take away from like the changes both structurally and how it feels in our system when we're intentional with the water and how we drink it and how we care for it. And of course, we live in a world where it will serve us and our loved ones and family and children best if we're really also mindful of what before, like how it gets to the stage before we're about to drink it or bathe in it, And so I really love all the emotional and intentional like components to it and how it's important and how consciousness can affect structure of water and whatnot. But do you pay much attention to how chlorinated and like the heavy metals that are in water and stuff like that?
I mean, you can smell it. So when I can smell water, I don't drink it.
That's interesting because I feel like you get to that point by drinking pure water for a while, and then you can really actually smell water that has stuff in it.
It's so strong.
It's pretty obvious.
Well, when you become cleaner and cleaner in your body, you can taste the difference in different waters. You can smell when there's things that really shouldn't be in water.
Mm-hmm.
Like water has many subtleties. I'm fortunate enough I don't have to drink municipal tap water. Even where we live, we have tanks that collect rain. And in New Zealand, where I live rurally, we don't have a lot going on in our skies, fortunately, so the rainwater is pretty beautiful. But many people don't have that option. And so many people, all they can afford is like filtered tap water. And I see that a lot of people still drink that. That's why I do talk about your conscious expression, because I've seen it makes at least structural change.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're collecting water, I love to keep water out of light. Like even by making little bags out of raw silk. Silk itself even builds exclusion zone when water's near it. You can do the same thing with linen because it has a high hertz frequency. It keeps it out of the light if you wrap it around your bottle, but it also helps to keep structural integrity last longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have linen kind of covers over the spring water deliveries that we get here. And it just helps, I think, preserve the water and like algae after a month from building.
Yeah. But, my area of specialty is in crystallography. And so there's lots of people out there with lots of different options for you being able to get the water to a beautiful state and also so that it's filtered all of those things out. I think that that's where I'll leave that, because I don't promote anyone's stuff.
Yeah. No, it's just a
so
good
I
reminder
don't
and
know.
invitation to filter out a lot of the bad stuff that you're going to be like. People don't realize also like the effects of breathing in from showers and bathing, even more so than drinking.
Yeah, because it's become like a gas that we're inhaling. It's much worse. So there's lots of different filtration systems that you can choose to use, but it's up to the person as to what they most resonate with. But there's also a lot of fear out there, and it's a lot of not feeding the fears.
Yeah.
Because
awareness, like, I think awareness that just leads to fear is going to perpetuate disease, but awareness that leads to action that empowers you, I think, is ultimately the goal.
Yeah. I think if we were able to get back to the time when the waters were clean and the waters we could just go and easily go and collect our spring water and live off the land and live on the land with bare feet, we would definitely feel quite different as an entire society. Everyone that goes walking along the beach barefoot, it's getting all the negative ions. They're already starting to have that feeling of feeling a little bit better, a little bit lighter.
What's one shift you wish humanity would make in its relationship to water?
I wish they would stop seeing it as only something to drink, as only something that washes away, our waste and our dirt, and to see water as a representation of something divine. And then we could start seeing ourselves as something divine, because water is a reflection of something that's related to God. And I think it's everywhere. There's very few places we can ever go where there is not a body of water somewhere, whether it's a plant or a lake or a person or an animal. And when you see, for the last 14 years, I've been immersed in water proving to me, showing me, I don't think it, I know it, that water has conscious expression. It might well be emotion that we can see. And yet, someone once said to me, what if water is expressing its consciousness through us and every living thing to observe itself from every different perspective? So it could well be that. But even just starting to think, well, why is water in every creation story? Why is water talked about so much in virtually all religions? Why is there something special about water? Why can water be holy? Why is it that even in the Quran it talks about all living things were made from water? And there's cleansing, there's healing waters. And even in my Maori culture, my father's native New Zealand Maori, the word for spirit is wairua. Wai meaning water and rua meaning two. It's a rudimentary way of saying it in English, but the two waters, the physical and spiritual waters, like the heavenly waters and the earthly waters. So I think the simplest answer was the first answer, and that simply is that to stop seeing water as something that is just something we drink, something that we just have around us, something that's just H2O. Someone once said the two hydrogens are feminine in the mode of levity, and the large oxygen is masculine in the mode of gravity, and together they create harmony and liquid water on Earth. And I loved that. I love the communion, the connection between masculine and feminine creating harmony.
What I love about getting to do this podcast is getting to talk to many people from disparate fields of different areas of study. from philosophical and to the environmental and to water and to like seeing how intercorrelated every aspect of this all is. And you have shared a lot of reminders that I know are really impactful and needed right now, like re-inviting that reverence to all life and the water that enables it all. So just this has been amazing, and sharing a lot of gratitude for you and for sharing your work. And before we close out, do you just have any last words you'd like to share with our audience, or anything before we head out?
A couple of days ago, I spoke to two artists, and one of his name is Noah and his sister Adriana. And Noah said, when I asked, the question, what is water? He simply said that water is the first expression of the Creator's first love.
That's a big mic drop right there.
Yeah.
The love that you share for water just radiates out of you and through your eyes, and how you show up. And so it's been a joy, and I'm looking forward to connecting and just being friends. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. For everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Know Thyself podcast. Let us know what this episode has shifted in your perspective of what water is and your relationship to it. Until next time, be well.